Canada just delivered a masterclass in economic diplomacy, and Donald Trump's aggressive tariff strategy is blowing up in his face. While the world watches Trump's trade war spiral out of control, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has just unveiled a brilliant counter-strategy that could fundamentally reshape North American trade. We're talking about billions in relief funds, strategic policy reversals, and a complete reimagining of Canada's economic approach. It's not just damage control, it's a signal. If Trump wants to play hardball, Canada won't just survive, they'll thrive. So what exactly did Carney announce? And why is this move so significant that it could change everything? To understand the magnitude of this development, we have to rewind to how we got here. And it's a story of escalating tensions, broken promises, and economic warfare that's been brewing since Trump returned to power. Trump's tariff war with Canada didn't start overnight. It began with his return to the White House in January 2025, when he immediately imposed a 25% tariff on Canadian goods, citing concerns about fentanyl flowing across the northern border. But here's the thing, Canadian government data shows that less than 0.1% of all fentanyl seizures entering the United States from 2022 to 2024 were made at the Canadian border. Almost all of the rest was confiscated at the U.S. border with Mexico. Trump was essentially punishing Canada for a problem that wasn't primarily theirs to begin with. But Trump wasn't satisfied with just 25%. By July 2025, he escalated further, announcing that tariffs would jump to 35% effective August 1st. This wasn't just about fentanyl anymore. Trump explicitly complained that Canada had retaliated with its own tariffs, something that any sovereign nation would do when facing unjustified trade penalties.
So businesses can use these funds to invest in the design of new products, to retool their plants to boost productivity, or to offset the costs of accessing new markets. And the fund will be open to all sectors, given the fact that the tariff impacts are wide-ranging across Canadian industries. La priorité sera accordée aux projets issus des secteurs les plus touchés par les tarifs, comme l'acier, l'aluminium, l'automobile et le bois d'œuvre. Les fonds de réponse stratégique travaillera en étroite collaboration avec nos nouvelles alliances sectorielles pour s'assurer que ces projets d'investissement ne soient pas freinés par les défis du marché du travail. Grâce à une meilleure corrélation entre les travailleurs et l'industrie, nous pourrons former efficacement et jumeler les travailleurs aux nouveaux emplois dans le secteur de demain. The third major thing we're announcing today is a comprehensive Buy Canadian policy. We are on a mission to build Canada strong through major infrastructure projects, through that modern defense industry, and by building millions of more homes. In that mission, the public sector can serve as an anchor customer for Canadian businesses. But for that to happen, a lot of things must change. At present, Canada's public procurement is following outdated rules of that old free trade order that no longer exists. For years, we've been buying as a government significantly from foreign suppliers for short-term gain. Now we need to use government procurement.
The global trade landscape has fundamentally shifted. We're witnessing the end of decades of free trade as the motor of global economic growth, replaced by a new age of economic nationalism and mercantilism. U.S. tariff rates have soared to their highest levels since the Great Depression in the 1930s, with tariffs being applied to all countries on nearly all goods. Countries must now essentially buy access to the world's largest economy through investments and policy changes. This isn't just a transition, it's a rupture with profound effects on the global economy. What made Trump's approach particularly damaging was its unpredictability. The tariffs didn't apply to all goods covered under the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, which meant that about 95% of Canadian exports remained protected. But for the businesses that were hit, the impact was devastating. Canadian steel producers, aluminum manufacturers, and automotive companies found themselves facing punitive duties that made their products uncompetitive in the American market. The Canadian Steel Producers Association called the situation a disappointment, while the United Steelworkers criticized any backing down from retaliatory measures. These weren't just statistics, these were real jobs, real communities, and real economic pain being inflicted by Trump's trade war. Trump's justification for the escalation was particularly revealing. In his letter to Carney, he wrote that Canada had retaliated with its own tariffs instead of working with the United States. But this completely ignored the reality of international trade relationships. When one country imposes unjustified tariffs, the standard response under international trade law is proportional retaliation. Canada wasn't being aggressive. They were following established diplomatic and economic protocols.
With the U.S. president.
Okay, well, let's go to results. Right now, we have the best trade deal of any country in the world. Okay, those are results. We think it can be better, and we're working to make it better. But to be absolutely clear, 85% of our trade with the United States is tariff-free. Nobody else is in that position. Our average tariff is about 5.5%. That's the lowest average tariff of any country in the world. So right now we have the best, but we have real issues. Without question, we have real issues in steel, in aluminum, in forest products, in autos, potentially in pharma, copper, some other sectors. So there's these strategic sectors that the U.S. has focused on where we have issues. And as well, there will be a review of CUSMA, our trade agreement with the U.S. and Mexico, starting next year. So we need to prepare for that. We need to lay the groundwork for that review, and we need to address as rapidly as possible these strategic sectors. Okay.
Despite these challenges, it's important to note that Canada currently maintains the best trade deal of any country in the world with the United States. 85% of Canadian trade with America is tariff-free, and Canada's average tariff of about 1.5% is the lowest of any country globally. However, real issues persist in strategic sectors including steel, aluminum, forest products, automobiles, pharmaceuticals, and copper, sectors that have become flashpoints in this escalating trade conflict. Trump's frustration with this normal response showed just how disconnected his trade strategy was from established international norms. The broader context makes Trump's approach even more problematic. Canada is America's second largest trading partner, with more than $410 billion of goods crossing into the United States annually. In 2024, Canada bought $349.4 billion worth of U.S. goods, while exporting $412.7 billion to America. This means Canada actually runs a trade surplus with the United States of about $63.3 billion. But rather than seeing this as evidence of a healthy, mutually beneficial relationship, Trump viewed it as a threat to American economic security. This fundamental misunderstanding of how trade relationships work set the stage for the escalating conflict. Enter Mark Carney with a response that was both strategic and devastating to Trump's narrative. On Friday, September 5th, Carney announced a comprehensive relief package designed to help Canadian businesses weather Trump's trade war, while simultaneously strengthening Canada's economic independence. The centerpiece was a $5 billion Canadian dollar fund, that's $3.6 billion US dollars, specifically designed to help firms in all sectors affected by tariffs. But this wasn't just throwing money at the problem.
Le Canada, en revanche, exporte souvent près de 60% de ses matières premières et importe ensuite les produits finis. With these changes in procurement, we will build more with Canadian steel, Canadian lumber, Canadian technology, Canadian workers. We will build big, build bold, build Canadian. Now, I said a moment ago when I started that this is a rupture. It's a big change that's being forced on us in a short period of time. So we need to provide immediate liquidity relief to businesses. There's immense change in a short period of time, and businesses that have relied most heavily on the trade with the United States, such as the auto sector, will need temporary immediate relief from liquidity pressures. Businesses need time to reposition themselves for the future. And for small and medium-sized businesses, the Business Development Bank of Canada will increase loans, the maximum loan size to help with this, from $2 to $5 million. For largest businesses and larger businesses, the Large Enterprise Tariff Loan Facility will provide flexible financing at scale with lower interest rates and longer maturities. We're going to implement these changes immediately to ensure that our businesses can bridge the gap to the future. And
this comprehensive suite of measures represents the most significant trade resilience initiative in Canadian history. The Strategic Response Fund will help Canadian businesses adapt and diversify their markets. A robust reskilling package will train 50,000 workers for new opportunities. And a revolutionary Buy Canadian policy transforms government procurement from best efforts to a clear obligation, ensuring Canadian taxpayer dollars support Canadian industries and workers. This was a carefully crafted strategy to turn Trump's aggression into an opportunity for Canadian economic transformation. The most significant element of Carney's announcement was the decision to waive the requirement that 20% of all vehicles sold in 2026 be emissions-free. This mandate, originally implemented by Justin Trudeau's Liberal government in 2023, had become a major burden for automakers already struggling with Trump's tariffs. The Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association welcomed the move, saying the mandate had imposed unsustainable costs on companies and threatened investment. But Carney didn't just eliminate the requirement, he launched an immediate 60-day review to reduce costs linked to the EV sales requirement across the board. This showed that Canada was willing to adapt its policies to support its industries during the trade war. Carney's strategy went far beyond just helping the automotive sector. He announced a comprehensive Buy Canadian federal procurement program, fundamentally changing how the Canadian government purchases goods and services. As Carney explained, Canada's public procurement had been following outdated rules of a free trade order that no longer existed. For years, Canada had been buying significantly from foreign suppliers for short-term gain. Now they would use government procurement, using Canadian taxpayer dollars, to spur Canadian businesses for longer-term prosperity. This wasn't just policy change, this was economic nationalism in response to Trump's economic nationalism. The agricultural sector, which had been particularly hard hit by both U.S. and Chinese tariffs, received targeted relief through a 370 million Canadian dollar package for canola farmers facing a 75.8% tariff from China. But again, this wasn't just relief, it was transformation. The package was designed to incentivize canola farmers to produce biofuel, with the federal government amending the clean fuel regulations to support the domestic biofuels industry. Canada was turning trade pressure into an opportunity to build new industries and reduce dependence on volatile international markets. Perhaps most significantly, Carney announced a reskilling program for up to 50,000 workers affected by tariffs. This massive investment in human capital showed that Canada wasn't just trying to weather the storm, they were preparing their workforce for a fundamentally different economic future. The program would help workers acquire new skills through their employers or recruitment companies, ensuring that Canadian workers could adapt to whatever economic changes the trade war might bring. But Carney's masterstroke was the timing and messaging of his announcement. Coming just hours after jobs data revealed that Canada's unemployment rate had jumped to a 4-year high, Carney's package demonstrated decisive leadership in the face of economic pressure. Rather than appearing desperate or reactive, Carney presented the measures as part of a broader strategy to transform Canada's economy into a force that could withstand the trade shocks of the Trump administration. The message was clear: Canada wouldn't just survive Trump's trade war, they would emerge stronger and more independent. The international response revealed just how effectively Carney had turned the narrative. While Trump's tariffs were widely seen as aggressive and destabilizing, Carney's response was viewed as measured, strategic, and focused on long-term economic development. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre tried to criticize the moves as capitulation, but the substance of the policies told a different story. Canada was investing in its own industries, supporting its own workers, and building economic resilience. Exactly what any responsible government should do when facing external pressure. What makes Carney's approach particularly brilliant is how it addresses the fundamental weakness in Trump's trade strategy. Trump's tariffs are designed to force other countries to make concessions by inflicting economic pain. But Carney's response transforms that pain into an opportunity for economic development and independence. Instead of becoming more dependent on the United States, Canada is becoming more self-reliant. Instead of weakening Canadian industries, the relief package is helping them adapt and strengthen. Trump's pressure is actually accelerating Canada's economic diversification, the exact opposite of what Trump intended. The broader implications extend far beyond the immediate trade dispute. Carney explicitly mentioned that the measures were designed to help Canada diversify its economy away from the United States, something he had campaigned on during his April election victory. Trump's tariffs were actually helping Carney achieve his strategic objectives of reducing Canadian dependence on American markets. This is the definition of a policy backfire. Trump's aggressive tactics were pushing Canada exactly where Carney wanted the country to go anyway. The steel and aluminum sectors, which have been particularly hard hit by Trump's sectoral tariffs, received indirect support through the broader relief fund, though Carney noted that companies could apply for help from existing funds. This measured approach showed that Canada was being strategic rather than reactive, providing support where needed while maintaining fiscal discipline. The contrast with Trump's scattershot approach to trade policy couldn't have been starker. Carney's handling of the Chinese tariffs on canola also demonstrated sophisticated economic statecraft. Rather than simply complaining about China's 75.8% tariff, Canada was using it as an opportunity to develop domestic biofuel production. This showed other countries that Canada could turn trade pressure into economic opportunity, potentially making them more cautious about using trade as a weapon against Canadian interests. The political implications within Canada were equally significant. By waiving the EV mandate, Carney showed he was willing to adapt environmental policies to support Canadian workers during economic pressure. This pragmatic approach helped inoculate him against conservative criticisms that he was putting ideology ahead of economic reality. At the same time, the broader relief package demonstrated that his government was actively working to protect Canadian jobs and businesses from external pressure. Perhaps most importantly, Carney's approach established a new model for how middle-power countries can respond to economic pressure from larger neighbors. Rather than simply retaliating with tariffs or capitulating to demands, Canada chose a third path, using external pressure as a catalyst for domestic economic development and strategic independence. This approach could influence how other countries respond to similar pressure from major powers. The timing of the announcement, coming just before Parliament resumed, also showed political acumen. Carney was positioning himself as a decisive leader taking concrete action to protect Canadian interests, while his conservative opponents were left arguing against policies that directly supported Canadian workers and businesses. The optics couldn't have been better for the Liberal government. Looking ahead, Carney's strategy creates several advantages for Canada in ongoing trade negotiations. By demonstrating that Canada can adapt and strengthen its economy despite external pressure, Carney has increased Canada's negotiating leverage. Trump's tariffs were supposed to force Canadian concessions, but instead, they've helped Canada build economic resilience and independence. This fundamentally changes the dynamic of any future negotiations. The $5 billion relief fund, with its flexible terms, also gives Canada significant tools to support businesses facing future trade pressures. Rather than being caught off guard by sudden tariff announcements, Canada now has a systematic approach to helping affected industries adapt and survive. This preparedness itself becomes a form of deterrence against future trade aggression. Carney's approach also strengthens Canada's position in BROA, or international forums. By demonstrating responsible economic leadership in the face of external pressure, Canada enhances its reputation as a reliable partner for other countries looking to diversify their own trade relationships away from volatile partners. This could lead to new trade opportunities that reduce Canada's dependence on the American market. The agricultural relief package, specifically the biofuel incentives, positions Canada to benefit from global trends toward renewable energy and sustainable agriculture. Rather than simply defending existing industries, Canada is using trade pressure as an opportunity to build the industries of the future. This forward-thinking approach contrasts sharply with Trump's backward-looking focus on traditional manufacturing and resource extraction. The worker retraining program represents perhaps the most significant long-term investment in Carney's package. By preparing 50,000 workers for new industries and technologies, Canada is building the human capital necessary to compete in a rapidly changing global economy. This investment will pay dividends long after the current trade disputes are resolved. What's particularly striking about Carney's approach is how it reframes the entire trade conflict. Instead of being about American pressure forcing Canadian concessions, the narrative becomes about Canadian resilience and strategic adaptation. Trump's tariffs become not a sign of American strength, but evidence of American inability to compete on a level playing field. This narrative shift is crucial for maintaining public support for Canadian policies and international sympathy for Canada's position. The Buy Canadian procurement policy also creates immediate economic benefits while building long-term industrial capacity. By guaranteeing domestic markets for Canadian producers, the policy reduces the impact of foreign tariffs while encouraging investment in Canadian manufacturing. This virtuous cycle strengthens the Canadian economy while reducing vulnerability to external pressure. Carney's decision to maintain some retaliatory tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automobiles while removing others shows sophisticated economic strategy. By keeping pressure on sectors where Canada has leverage while reducing friction where possible, Canada maintains negotiating strength while demonstrating willingness to de-escalate when appropriate. This balanced approach makes Canada appear reasonable while maintaining pressure for American concessions. The international reaction to Carney's announcement has been notably positive, with many countries viewing Canada's approach as a model for responding to economic pressure from major powers. This enhanced international standing gives Canada additional leverage in trade negotiations and opens opportunities for new partnerships that reduce dependence on the American market. Trump's tariff strategy was supposed to demonstrate American economic dominance and force concessions from trading partners. Instead, it's pushed Canada toward greater economic independence and strategic autonomy. Carney's relief package accelerates this process while providing concrete benefits to Canadian workers and businesses. The result is a stronger, more resilient Canadian economy that's less vulnerable to American pressure. Exactly the opposite of what Trump intended to achieve. As we look at the broader implications of this economic confrontation, it's clear that Carney has successfully turned Trump's aggression into an opportunity for Canadian strategic advancement. The relief package isn't just about surviving the current trade war, it's about building the foundation for a more independent and resilient Canadian economy. Trump's tariffs have become the catalyst for the economic transformation that Carney promised during his election campaign. In trying to pressure Canada into submission, Trump has actually helped Canada achieve its strategic objectives. That's not just a policy failure, it's a complete strategic backfire that will have consequences far beyond the current trade dispute.